Okay, thank you so much, and good morning, and welcome to everyone who's joining us today on our session, where we are going to be having a presentation on empowering women to step into the leadership role. My name is Selon Lovo, and I'll be chairing the session today. And I would really like to take this opportunity to thank our presenters, Zelmia and Karien, and also to thank you who have joined us this morning. The topic that we are going to be listening to, which we are going to be listening to today, is a very pertinent topic in the mining industry, not only in the mining industry, but in the general in the industry as a whole, where we find that there's quite a lot of a vacuum in terms of women leaders in the industry. So finding that only female leaders not only impact the culture and strategic direction in a company, but can also improve the bottom line. So it is really worrying that women tend to be underrepresented in the leadership roles. And it's not only the glass ceiling that holds women back from leadership responsibilities, but often they also contribute to their self-imposed barriers, whether they are aware of it or not. So SIMM, which is the Southern African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy, established a committee for diversity and inclusions in the mining sector. And the committee really seeks to advance diversity, which incorporates things like gender, ethnicity, religion, and other diversifying factors and inclusions in the industry through a number of initiatives and activities that address the professional needs and aspirations of persons that are actively pursuing their careers in the minerals industry. And today, for us, we are likely to get a talk from Karien and Zelmia, where we get to hear about the how women can redefine their roles in the industry and step up to take the leadership roles. So we really appreciate this opportunity, and we also want to thank Zelmia and Karien for coming on board and preparing a presentation that is going to be enlightening for all of us who are working in the mining sector. I'm just going to take this opportunity to also give you a bio of Zelmia and Karien. Let me just open my phone here. Zelmia is a metallurgical engineer, and she obtained her honors degree from the University of Pretoria. She started out in iron ore, but moved to coal process engineering in 2008. She was involved with projects in India and China, and currently she is the commissioning manager of GG6 Expansion Project in Lephalale. She believes in connection, innovation, and learning. She wants to build a safe place for members to grow into diverse, high-performing teams where innovation may flourish. Zelmia is also involved with SIMM. She's currently the Junior Vice President of SIMM, mother to a little girl with big dreams, and she wants to tell all women to have the courage to go for it. Thank you, Zelmia. And then the bio for Karien. Karien van der Merwe is a registered industrial psychologist with 18 years experience, mostly in the mining industry. She facilitates the human connection that is needed to get the job done. Karien coaches teams and leaders on the impact of belonging and human connection on performance. 4 years ago, she registered the Thrive Institute together with fellow industrial psychologist and MD Neo Mamatuva. Together, they specialize in assisting teams to navigate diversity and inclusion, team dynamics, and courageous conversations. She is currently an associate of ITD supporting the EXXARO GG6 mega project on their team journey. Karien's main goal is to help people in organizations thrive by supporting teams and organizations to foster health, human relationships that enables team to reach their common goal. She is also spouse to an adventurous husband and mother to 3 very busy and beautiful kids. Welcome, Karien and Zelmia, and I'm so looking forward to your presentation to a topic that is very, very close to my heart. And I'll give over to you now.
Thank you, Prof. Sela. I've just shared my screen, and I hope everyone can see our presentation. This is our very first webinar, so I first would just like to thank SIAM for giving us this wonderful opportunity to present our case study to you. As Prof. Sela said, I'm Zelmia Botha, and I am the Commissioning Manager for the GG6 Expansion Project. It's a Greenfields coal project that had to execute in a brownfields environment with its own established culture. I'm also the only technical female manager for this project. Karien is our project coach, and she helped us to create and maintain our own new culture with our own brand new team. We'll talk more about this as we go through the presentation, but for now, I would like to start us off with a book called Lean In, published by Sheryl Sandberg. And in this book, she describes a situation where women were invited to sit at a table and partake in a leadership conversation. Even after being given this opportunity, the women still opted not to sit at the table. And Sheryl uses this analogy to describe the internal obstacles female leaders have to overcome on their leadership journey. It made me think about my own story, and I wanted to use my story to empower women to not only embrace opportunities, but to go and actively seek the opportunities by believing that they do have unique value that they can bring to the table. We're going to do that today through sharing these 5 themes: social safety, how to move from power and knowledge to power in relationships, strategies to manage diverse stakeholders, how to have those courageous conversations and hopefully constructive conflict, and how to determine your team's culture drivers. Before I start off with my own story, I want to ask you 2 questions. And I want you to maybe write it down so that you remember your answers as we go through the presentation. The first question I have is, what is your exposure to leadership in your own unique industry, and what was the impact that it had on you? And secondly, I want to know, who are your own role models on your own leadership journey? So for me, these 2 questions were very difficult to answer, and I realized that I might not have so many good role models, especially female role models, in leadership. I started off in a specialist environment. So my exposure to leadership was that of highly academic individuals, internationally published, world-renowned scientists. So for me, leadership was always perfectionism and power in knowledge. And then the incident happened where a visionary male project manager gave me the choice between staying specialized or moving into what I then thought was general management. And I decided to make the move. But when I showed up, I realized this is my first exposure to leadership with a brand new multidisciplinary team, and that I actually have no idea what I'm doing. So as the true engineer I am, I went back to literature, and I found this study published in the 1970s already, where leadership is referred to as a human passion, and it's about human connections. And when that fails to develop, the problem is actually with the leader's inabilities, and it hinges around her own defenses. And I realized that my own perception of my own lack of knowledge was holding me back. And in actual fact, nowhere in the literature did they mention knowledge when they talked about leadership. They mentioned connections and the ability to create an environment where diversity and innovation could flourish. That made me think about the link between healthy connections and the core values of a high-performing team. And I realized if I wanted my team to trust the team and the environment and feel free to express themselves and to engage in constructive criticism, I had to create that environment and that safe space through meaningful connections. And it was at this stage that I realized what the power in relationship was. But to be able to do that, to believe in that power and to create that safe space, I had to reprogram my own fear of criticism, and I had to overcome my own shame triggers. And it's very nice in theory, but I didn't know how to make that shift without losing my own unique, loud female attributes. And it was at that stage that I was introduced to the work of Bill George, and his work centers around authentic leadership. While he's talking about authentic leadership, he talks a lot about values. And of course, I knew about values, but for me, that was very theoretical until my little girl once asked me, why do I have to do homework? And I immediately answered and said, you have to do your homework because in this house we believe in learning. And I then realized that my beliefs and my values drive all my decisions. So in a work context or in my role in leadership, if I didn't know what my values were, I didn't know myself. So I couldn't engage in the difficult conversations and in the difficult unknown environment because I didn't know what my own boundaries were and I didn't know what I stood for. I think the challenge is that less than 10% of organizations have operationalized their values into behaviors. And this is where my brand new team and myself started. This is where we found common ground in developing the brand promise, the way we want to work with each other, our own values. And I realized that none of these practices relies so much on diversity as it actually relies on collaboration between the different diversity groups. And coincidentally, collaboration is a unique natural capability of a female leader. But knowing that you can be authentic, that you can lean into your values in difficult conversations and a difficult environment doesn't necessarily tell you how to overcome your shame triggers. I still experience the shame triggers. And I then realized, going back to literature again, that this is true for male and female leaders. So, for example, when a male leader engages in a difficult conversation where he needs to ask to go home because he needs to look after children, the shame trigger is often around masculinity. For female leaders, it is more around what is considered the feminine norm. And lo and behold, there was a study published on this as well in 2005, what is considered feminine norms. And basically, we have to be nice, we have to be modest, and we have to be domestic. So what that meant for me is speak your mind, but don't upset anyone. React, but don't show it because then you overreact. And always remain calm, otherwise you are seen as irrational and emotional. And maybe the biggest shame trigger for me was don't be a know-it-all, but also don't say that you don't know. And this was confirmed in a study that was published last year, actually, when a male leader says, I don't know, he is perceived as being an authentic leader. But when a female leader says, I don't know, she is perceived as being weak and incompetent. So I very quickly realized I needed some very good female leader role models to be able to navigate this difficult environment and difficult conversations and overcome my own shame triggers. So the first female role model I encountered was Laura Liswood. She's at the head of the Council of Women World Leaders. Her studies basically found that women form deeper connections, they collaborate differently, they find more creative solutions, and they can focus more on individual stakeholder needs all at once, and they tend to be better prepared. So I realized I do have value that I can bring to the table. I then encountered the work of Helena Morrissey. At the time of this study, she was the chief exec of the Newton Investment Management Corporation. She was also at the head of the 30% Club, and she has 9 children. And my male colleagues always ask me, why do you mention that? And I told them, because I'm struggling with just 1 child, and she's doing all of this with 9 children. During her work, she found before the 2008 financial crisis that diversity was mainly seen as a theory something to comply to. And after the 2010 after the financial crisis in 2010, she found that diversity was seen more as a solution, because the percentage women on boards increased from 12.5% to 30%. And it made me realize that diversity and female leaders are actually part of a solution. The third role model for me is Christine Lagarde. At the time of this study, she was at the head of IMF, but she is now the first female leader of the European Bank. And her research found that by adding just one more woman to your management structure, you have the opportunity to boost your return on assets with up to 13%. So there was definitely room for me. I could be authentic, lean into my values, have the difficult conversations because I do have value to add. But for us as female leaders, it's still important to have an environment that supports you. And that is where Karien comes in. So I am now going to share my screen with Karien. And as Karien is then going to take you through the rest of the presentation.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. It's nice for me to also share this space with you, and it's always an honor to share it with Zelmia. She's definitely one of my favorite coaches. I'm not allowed to say that, but I am saying it now. Okay, so what I want to share with you is just maybe a bit of the environment that we created for the team. And obviously that environment also supported Zelmia's journey. And then I'm going to share a bit of the technicalities around what happens to your body when you are in relationship with people in terms of team dynamics. So I'm going to look a bit at the neuropsychology or the neurology of relationship and especially of courage. And then hopefully that will just give some picture in terms of what was supporting Zelmia to go through this leadership growth journey that she's been on. And I want to start actually just by saying I want to tell you the story of a leader that created space for a team to do their job. So that is our project manager, Jaco van Dijk, GG6 project manager, and definitely a leader to look up to. He creates space and platform for everybody to engage in what they need to engage. Okay. So I just want to give a landscape. In terms of EXXARO mega projects, it's a large investment and commitment. It's got vast complexity, like I will show you now. My part of the talk will focus on the complexity of the relationships and how difficult it is actually to navigate yourself through those difficult relationships and getting the task done eventually. And then it's also projects that have a long-lasting impact on the economy, environment, and society. So these are multi-billion rand projects. So that's just a description or illustration of what a project, the life cycle of a project looks like. And the reason I give you this is just to show you that there's a definite start and end date to all of these processes. So the project starts at a certain date and ends at a certain date, but within the project, there's also different phases that definitely start and end. So when we developed the team journey, we went back to the age-old model of 1965, the Tuckman group forming stages model, or the group forming stages. So then we said, okay, in those group forming stages, there's specific behaviors you can expect from people in those, in all of those stages happening. So there's specific behaviors in the forming. The people are still feeling each other out. They're reluctant to engage, but they're all very excited to engage in the project and so forth. So I'm not going to go through the detail of this. When you receive the presentation, you're welcome to read through the detail of that. What's important here is that we identified the behaviors, and then we said, okay, so in those behaviors, there's specific actions that we want to take to make sure that we can help the people navigate through these phases effectively, especially the storming phase. Because that's the phase where you realize everything is not, it's past the honeymoon phase, so you start having conflict and the pressure gets on, and you want to help the team navigate themselves through that by, for instance, things like the role clarification, conflict resolutions. But we also, in the beginning of the project, did a code of conduct, which was just a moral compass for the team. So it wasn't rules, it wasn't a tick list in terms of you right or you wrong or you good or bad. It's just a moral compass in terms of how we would like to engage with one another. And we don't always get it right, but I'm fairly certain we are at that stage in the project where we can also circle back and say, I didn't get it right this time, let's see how we can try to tackle this issue again. So that was the purpose of the code of conduct, and it definitely created an environment for engagement. So this next slide just shows you the difficulty or the complexity of the relationship. So there's numerous stakeholders. We haven't even listed all the stakeholders on here. And all these stakeholders have a specific expectation, and then there's behavior you can expect when these expectations are not met. And although we say that we are one team and we have one goal, all the various stakeholders actually have different goals. So for the contractors, the main goal eventually is cost, is to make money. The main goal for the project is to build the plant and to get semi-soft coking coal out into the world. So, so we try our best to say that we've got one goal, but it doesn't work out that way. And because of that, the relationships are put under enormous strain. So how are we actually doing it? So I'm going to give you a little bit of the neuropsychology here now in terms of how we try to support and navigate these relationships. But I want to say that we deliberately chose from the beginning that we are going to focus on relationships. So when I was introduced to Yaku, the project manager, one of the first things he said to me was relationships is one of the main reasons project fail. So he wants someone on the team to focus on the relationships that the team has within the team, but also with stakeholders. Okay, so navigating complex stakeholder relationships become easier when you understand what happens in your body during social interaction. And you become more aware and you're able to manage all of those things better and engage more constructively. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is actually courage. And as we are all inspired by Nelson Mandela still, I want to quote this. His famous courage quote is, I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. So someone who steps into the situation despite the fear. And if you look at this next slide, you'll see that is a neuron connection. So in your brain, you have millions and billions of neuron connections. If you look at the next slide, this slide tells you it's the amygdalas in your brain. So these are the fight-flight triggers in your brain, which is, there's a heck of a lot of neuron connections in your fight-flight triggers that get triggered when you are in certain situations, especially if you've had bad experiences before. So for instance, if you had bad experiences with conflict before, and you are now going into a conflict situation, you are going to feel uncomfortable and not wanting to go into that situation. What we actually want to get to is that you get to prefrontal cortex regulation, so when you are in fight-flight mode, it's difficult for you to access your prefrontal cortex and really access the problem-solving, innovative, creative side of your brain. So what we want to teach people is skills to move out of amygdala regulation into prefrontal cortex regulation. Okay, so I want to quickly just focus on vulnerability from Brené Brown is when we feel risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. So whenever you have to go have that courageous conversation or present something to the board of directors or the steercom of a project, you feel risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. So you feel uncertain. And courage is to show up and be seen when you cannot control the outcome. So you have that fear, but you still show up. And then just to summarize that, vulnerability is that's not a weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage, because we are still willing to engage despite the fact that we feel vulnerable. Okay, so if we look at the next picture, I just want to quickly go into a little bit more detail of fight-flight. So if you are in amygdala regulation, you ask yourself, how important is this situation for my survival? Does this make me feel I belong? Is this me, or does this give me meaning? So subconsciously, your brain asks yourself these questions the whole time when you're in social interaction. And if the answer is no to any one of those questions, you are going to feel uncomfortable. Your heart rate's going to go up. You're going to sweat maybe a bit on your forehead, or you're going to be out of breath a little bit, like I'm feeling in the beginning of, or felt in the beginning of this talk. And then courage is to consciously override the uncomfortableness and engaging anyway. So how do we get that? So one of the theories that we used was the emotional agility theory from Susan David. And her theory is that emotions is just the data. So when you feel uncomfortable, it's those amygdalas lighting up, warning you that this situation might threaten who you are. It's not necessarily socially safe. And your thoughts are the reactions to the emotions. And your thoughts can be rational or irrational. So it's not the emotions necessarily that's irrational. It's your reaction to those emotions that can make you irrational. And emotional agility actually asks us to take a step back and say, okay, this is what I'm feeling. Just take a step back and think about what you are feeling and why you are feeling that. And that will put you into a space where you can actually start to think problem solving and not feel like you want to run away or fight back for survival. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide. Right, so we need two very specific things that we need for courage is a socially safe environment, and then we can also build our courage with skills development and personal and leadership development. So that can move you, these things can move you quicker out of amygdala regulation into prefrontal cortex regulation. From out of that, I want to flee or fight into problem solving, innovative, creative thinking. Okay, so the social safety bridges that takes you into prefrontal cortex regulation is things like your identity. So do I know who I am on this team? What can I contribute to this team? And then also, does the work that I contribute give me meaning? So does it actually contribute to the greater good, and can I see that I play a very vital role in the team? And if those two things are there, then you have belonging in the team. So you're allowed to be who you are in the team. You're not going to be rejected for raising difficult questions or being the devil's advocate in the team or being the quiet one or the loud one. You're allowed to be you, because whatever you bring to the team, your technical skills as well as your personality flavor is allowed to be in the team. And when you feel socially safe, you are able to, with the rest of the team, access your problem-solving, creative and innovative side of your brain. And then the courage building skills that you can learn, the first one is always self-awareness. So to know exactly what you are feeling in the moment. Because from there you can navigate the rest. So then the skills that you can learn is something like emotional agility that I've just spoken to you. You can do some fact checking. So there's actually a very nice book if you want to write it down. It's called Factfulness. Just brings out the importance of making sure that you've got the facts right before you react. So that's one of the ways that you can step back and say, okay, let me just think about what I'm feeling and make sure that it's the right thing I'm feeling. And then also to have an emotional buddy, someone that you can check in with to actually do the fact checking with as well. Making sure that person gives you some feedback in terms of, okay, you've got it right there, maybe not so much there. It's important to have someone that you can also vent to, so that when you engage in the conversation with the person that's got that you have the conflict with, it can be more constructive. So just on that point, one of the code of conduct rules that we have on the project and that we try to adhere to as far as possible is that you are allowed to vent with one person, because you need to get perspective and get some external insights. But the next person you engage with should be the person that you have the conflict with, so that we can sort out the issues right then and there and then move on. Okay, and then you can also do some of the neurozone techniques that we've learned in our project. You can also go research some neurozone on the internet if you want to. It's a very nice program. So do some deep breathing. Deep breathing takes you into a more relaxed, your body into a more relaxed state. Ask for time out. So we also have in our code of conduct a thing that you can at any time ask for time out and then just circle back to the conversation later. Make sure that you exercise. If you are fit, your brain is just inclined to more easily go into your prefrontal cortex, and it opens up your creative and problem-solving brain. It's very technical, so I'm not going to go into that detail now, but make sure you exercise and make sure you sleep between 7 and 9 hours a night at once. So when I say this, the people with little kids always laugh at me, and I know it's a huge challenge for all of us to sleep properly, but sleep really has a huge impact on your irritability and your ability to see things for what they really are. So very important to do those things right. And then practical skills, practical courage building skills. We looked a lot at the work of Brené Brown. So we focused on the rumbling tools. So what is the stuff that you can use to actually have the difficult conversations? That's the rumbling. Live into your values. So as Zelmia said earlier on, know exactly what your values are and what's important to that, and do not live outside of that. So if someone asks something of you that's outside of your values, set that boundary and say, I want to help you with this. I cannot do it in this way. Maybe we can rather do it in this way. So make sure that you live into your values. Then braving trust. I really wish I could go through this with you in detail, but I want to encourage you to read the book Dare to Lead from Brené Brown. It really focuses a lot on braving is an acronym for trust, and she breaks down trust to understand exactly where is the problem with the trust and what is it that we can work on. And it focuses a lot on behavior rather than someone's character. So when you realize that you don't trust someone, it might be something in their behavior that triggers it, and it's not necessarily their character. And if you know what that behavior is, you can actually change it and find a way to work with this person. And then the last one, definitely not the least one, is to learn how to rise, to build the right resilience to carry on and push through the difficult situations and all the challenges and pressure that these mega projects bring into people's lives. Okay, so what I want to just quickly read to you now, and this was extremely important, I think, especially for the female leaders, is to realize it's not the critic who counts. It's not the woman who points out how the strong girl stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them differently. The credit belongs to the girl who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there's no effort without error or shortcoming. But it's also the woman who does actually do the striving. She knows the great enthusiasm, the great devotions. She spends herself and her cause worthy, and who is best known in the end, and who at best knows in the end that the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst also knows if she fails, at least she failed daring greatly. So this is, Brené Brown also quotes this a lot, just to show that if you are not in the arena getting your face dirty, you are actually not worthy of criticizing the people who are actually there. So when you are in the arena, also don't listen to the critics if they are not with you in the arena. That's actually what it boils down to. Okay, so what's also then important, and that I actually want to share, is that Zelmia got this right very nicely, is the leader's role in creating the social safety. So in the project environment, we had Yaku, who's the project manager, that really created a great, huge social safe space for the team to do their work, and that actually filtered down. And Zelmia was also one of our leaders that stepped into that very strongly. What is it that the leader needs to do to create social safety? So what we focused on a lot, and I'm going to finish off here and give back to Zelmia after this, is we said we're not going to go into almost the traditional ways of managing, especially in the project and construction environment. So we are not going to exercise power over people. So we are not going to get into people's way. We're going to get out of people's way to do their job. Okay, so most of what we call management is people getting into other people's ways of doing their job. And where it comes from is power. We believe that power is to influence or direct people's behavior or the course of events. So in business terms, it means we can control people and we can control the future. But as we all know, I think as we all are very aware of it, especially now, is it's really a huge illusion. People cannot be managed, and the future is definitely not predictable and manageable. So what we chose to rather focus on is power with. So finding common ground, building collective strength with your team. Power two, this is very important, giving your team members their own agency. So allow them to do their job and lead their own teams. And then also power within. This is grounded in a very strong foundation of self-worth and self-knowledge, and trusting your own self-worth and trusting your own self-knowledge. So from there, Zelmia can share a little bit more in terms of how she actually practically applied all of these things and support systems that was created for her to do her job. And she took it and ran with it. Zelmia? Thanks.
Thank you, Karien. Okay, right. So Karien now described how you could create an environment to support a female leader, especially in an uncertain environment where she has to engage in a lot of difficult conversations, and often wants to go in amygdala regulation and not necessarily prefrontal cortex regulation. So although we have the supportive environment and you know you've got your own unique values that you bring to the table, you still have to choose to make that shift. So you have to make the move. No one else can make that move for you. And I sometimes have to make that move daily. So I think for me, I've listed the biggest shifts that I had to make. For me, letting go of perfection and choosing to just have the courage to show up, even though I feel I don't know anything, was a big move. Then also to try and let go of placing all my value in knowledge and rather become curious and ask the questions and be willing to learn, admit that you don't know. And maybe also a very big one is not talking around situations or around people anymore, but rather talking directly to the situation, address the person. And although I sometimes have to make this move daily, even this morning, I still cannot do this without experiencing some shame triggers. So I will sometimes still feel stupid. I will sometimes feel like my work is not adding any value. And I always have the fear of rejection, but I'm going to keep on showing up and I'm going to keep on doing this because of this study that you see on the slide now. So on the x-axis, you'll see the percentage women graduates in STEM, science, technology, and engineering. On the y-axis, you'll see the gender gap. So I would have expected to see the most women graduates in STEM in places like Germany and Sweden and Netherlands. And in fact, they have the lowest percentage graduates and the highest gender gap. The researchers still don't know why, with equal knowledge and equal opportunity, women choose not to step into this arena. But what they did find is that women in STEM should focus their efforts on the young would-be STEM women. And they must create a positive environment for these young girls so that they start interacting with positive STEM ideas. And this is crucial because any form of engineering, science, technology, any form of that is central to innovation. And innovation drives economic growth. And female leaders are part of diversity, which is seen as a crucial part of innovation. So by taking women out of this equation, you are actually stifling innovation and you're stifling growth. So I work away from home quite a lot. And my little girl once told me it's not nice for her if I'm always away. And I said to her, but I am doing this for you and all little girls around the world so that they know they can do it too. And she said to me, but I'm not going to work. I'm going to stay at home and look after the children. My husband is going to work. And that choice is also fine. There's nothing wrong with that choice. I just wanted to have the courage to first show up and test the environment. So to encourage women to do this, I want to share my own little toolbox that I've used. on my journey, although it's very far from over, this for me was a good starting blocks. So like Karien mentioned, we had quite a few stakeholders. And although we say one team, one goal, they obviously had their own drivers for success. Then we were in a brownfields environment with their own cultures, so operations, projects, commissioning all had to execute at the same time. That means a shared work area, shared responsibility, shared safety protocols and procedures. And on top of that, we had to commission from the run-of-mine prep area through 5 different beneficiation plants into a common stockyard area. So in short, this is a recipe for destructive conflict. So how did we change that to constructive conflict? I did that first with a coach. So if you've got an engineering manager or a project manager, why not have a well-being manager that looks after the team members and the roles that they play and how they engage with each other? I can truly recommend investing in a coach in your area. Then we created safety. We looked at how to have courageous conversations, creating structure and clarity, taking up ownership, and building resilience. I think the most difficult one for us was having the courageous conversations and rather having constructive conflict rather than destructive. And Karien started us off, as she mentioned, with a code of conduct. This was basically just how we interact with one another. She then developed a difficult conversation model for us, for the team, but we mostly relied on rumbling tools, which Karien also referred to. And rumble is basically just choosing to have this conversation, although it's tough and uncomfortable. And we did that by basically just being curious. Just try to understand. And we ask a set of questions that you can get from the Dare to Lead book. It's basically things like, tell me more about this. Help me understand your point of view. I'm wondering how you see this. I'm curious about how you see this. Walk me through it. And once you have the tools or the language to have a difficult conversation, you can start creating safety. So there's quite a lot of projects that prove the importance of safety. The Google Aristotle project, a LinkedIn study, but we chose to follow the Brené Brown model, where we purposefully created team sessions where we could share collective joy, but also, and more importantly, collective pain. So we encouraged people to disagree with each other and make contact with the people that you are in disagreement with, whilst speaking up nicely. And we did a qualitative evaluation of these sessions, and more than 70% of the participants had a positive reaction to these sessions, and they actually wanted more of these sessions. And overall, we scored a 4 out of 5 for our sessions. Once you've started creating safety, you can go into structure. And I think the first step is just understand, where do you fit into your own unique industries organization? So commissioning generally falls towards the end phases of the project until I was introduced to the SASL model. And they actually already include commissioning in the planning phases of a project. And this has huge benefits because you now work with end use, you work, plan, design with end use and operations in mind. So you contract completely differently with each other if you think of operations rather than just construction. You also include key owners, team members a lot earlier on. So the forming stages and the storming stages happen a lot earlier. Once you've established where you fit into your own organization structure, start with team orientation. This basically just means, what is the inclination of each and every single stakeholder to collaborate as part of one team with one goal? The GG6 Expansion Project did that by incorporating key owners team members in the project structure. So yes, there's a challenge to this. You are asking a resource or a team member that was involved in day-to-day activities to now move over to a unique, sort of uncertain environment and go and make the change. In some instances, people will even call this go and create the risk. But the advantage of this was that you get amazing knowledge transfer, it's quicker decision making, and by including the onus team member in your project structure, you now have support from someone with a vast amount of knowledge about the arena that you want to work in. Once you've got your team orientation, look at team identity. There's a lot of models out there, but we've chosen to work with the Thinking Fusion model from the Northwest University. And obviously this has a flavor from the project in it, but we use this to create our own brand promise, the way we work, the legacy we want to leave behind, and the values that we have. I just want to pause a moment at the commitment value. We called it extreme ownership. And I think the best way to describe this is by focusing on the Stanford business study on blaming. So they found that this is actually very easy, it's very common, and blaming is actually contagious. But people in this culture lose status, they learn less, and the team generally performs worse than a team that takes up ownership. We practiced ownership by asking two questions. The first is, what is my role in this? And the second is, how can I do this differently? So by asking what your role is in any situation and asking how you could have done this differently gives you a deeper understanding of your own role and your own impact. It gives you control back, and you learn more, you develop more, and you do innovative problem solving across all boundaries in all industries. Now that you've created your structure, you can move into clarity, and we did that through a RACI. It's basically just responsible, accountable, consult, and inform, but we approached it a little bit differently. We first looked at understanding the objectives of the project. Then we looked at what our own inputs would be to these objectives. We identified our stakeholders, and then we looked at their own understanding of the project objectives, and only then did we do the RACI. We did this RACI across all boundaries with all stakeholders in the project. For our own internal team, we often looked at the levels of work model. This was developed by Elliot Jacques. And if you want an agile and a flexible team that is able to move around, you need to look at the levels of work so that you can identify who is executing at what level and at what level do you need support. Whilst doing all of this, it will help a lot if you develop a common language. So I'm just going to use a few examples. In your own unique industry that you operate in, what are the definitions that you use? And how did you develop those definitions? Is it according to your industry, your own project standard, or according to your client? And if you have criteria for success, is it your own criteria, your organization's? Is it a standard, or was it agreed upon with your client? Don't be afraid to custom make your own organization's guidelines to suit your own needs. If you go through this exercise of creating a common language, you create a baseline and you create boundaries, which will facilitate collaboration when the plan changes, and it always changes. It always does. When you go through this exercise of common language, you will often find and identify the unspoken expectations more easily. And we've realized on our journey thus far that conflict arises when an unspoken expectation meets reality. So by setting the baseline and setting the boundaries, you very early on realize what those unspoken expectations are. And obviously, just a short disclaimer here, all our sessions were facilitated. We did not attempt to do this on our own. It was facilitated to ensure proper collaboration. And again, remember that collaboration is a unique capability of the female leader. And before I give back to Professor Sello, I would just like to show the books that we've referred to. In the slide here, Karien has also referred to Neurozone for resilience. You can look that up. I think they have a LinkedIn page as well. And then we use the EXXARO model, the Incredible Leader EXXARO model as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zelmia and Karien, for this wonderful presentation. And I learned a lot, and I'm sure all of our delegates who were listening learned a lot. I see there's quite a few questions, which really shows how important this topic is. And I just want to say, before I start also looking at the questions, I would like to say that this presentation is also going to be made available to all the delegates who took part, and it's also going to be available on YouTube if you want to have a look at it, but it's also going to be sent to you. So I'm going to read the questions here, and hopefully Zelmia and Karien can be able to give us some answers. The first question is from Winnie Kriya. She asked, projects are fast-paced and culture change takes time. What are the practical tips for moving through the storming phase faster, specifically regarding female leadership issues? I don't know whether, Karien, I think probably this one was posted directly to you.
I think what we did is we looked at what is the typical behavior that you can get in the storming phase. And I think the most crucial thing there is people's relationship with conflict. So how comfortable am I with managing conflict? So there's only two ways of handling conflict, destructive or constructive. And avoiding the conflict is destructive. So you have to find a constructive way to engage with the conflict. And that's where I think Zelmia can share a lot of practical experience in terms of, and that's why it was important for me to share the courage part of that with you. So what we did is we created in the forming stage already the code of conduct, which was a bit of a moral compass and just introducing it to the team. So we had small team sessions with all of the various teams where the leaders actually took the lead in. So the leadership drew up the code of conduct, and then they took the lead in spreading the code of conduct into the rest of the team. And then from that, it was our moral compass in terms of how we wanted to engage with conflict. And if you can engage with the conflict constructively and get yourself out of the fight-flight mode and into where both parties actually use their creative, problem-solving, innovative side of your brain, then you get to a solution much quicker. So in the beginning, it took a bit of exercise and a bit more courage, but it's like running the comrades. So if you exercise, you're going to sweat, irrespective of whether you're running, but you're going to make it. So it's also a fitness thing that people just needed to get into. I think the most important part of the storming, because whenever someone new comes in, whether it's a new team member or a new stakeholder, you have a bit of storming. But if you do use the skills and the tips that we've been trying to teach the people, it really makes a huge difference, and people are definitely now more fit in facing the conflict than they were then. Also in the storming phase, there was either myself or the project leader facilitated a lot of the conflict sessions. So initially we supported with facilitating, but we got to that point where we are now in the performing phase, where people actually in the moment, head on, face the conflict, work through it, and carry on. So I think the most important one is just to find a way to deal with the conflict constructively.
Yeah, that does take a bit of training, though, I must say.
Yeah. One of those things that's easier said than done.
Yes, that's true. Then we have got a question from Anonymous. Anonymous says, how do you handle inappropriate sexist comments and jokes in the workplace? I don't know who wants to take that. Zelmia, I think.
Got good example.
Yes. I think I've been asked this question quite a lot, so it's worrying to receive this question so much. And I'm sitting here gauging how forthright I should be or how political I should be in answering this question. I think at the start of my career, I would have just brushed it off and acted like this has not happened at all and move on. I think with the tools that I have now through this leadership journey that I went through, I think take a step back, look at the emotional hook the emotions you are feeling. Oftentimes, the comments that you receive, the person that it's coming from will also play a big role. If it's someone that you are having problems with or challenges with, you might experience it differently if it comes from someone that you often joke with, or that you know often tends to make these comments. So when you take the step back to determine what the hook is, what the emotion is that you're feeling, this will also drive how you then respond. And some of the literature that I've read, Karien, you must help me now, I can't remember which literature this was, but the lady said that you have to make a difference between reacting and responding. So taking the step back and evaluating yourself first, and then choosing how you are going to respond is a big first step. Then when you've chosen how to respond, sometimes I find it difficult to reactivate the conversation. So there's also very good language out there to do that, to have a cup of coffee with this person and say, I just want to circle back to this comment that you've made. And I want to share with you what the impact was on me. So instead of focusing what they were thinking, where it came from for them, what's driving them, just keep the focus on what the impact is on you. And then very importantly, to end off with what is the support you're looking for. So you must clearly decide before you choose to respond, what is it that you want out of that session? Do you want it to stop? Do you want the person to explain why they are doing it? Do you want them to apologize? Or what is it that you want from that session? So that would basically be my answer. Karien, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I think the most difficult thing is to, in the situation, not flee, because that's what people tend to do, is they tend to just shut down and not react back. And for the moment, it might be okay, but make sure that you circle back and sort it out with that person, because it might also be a situation where the individual is not even aware of the impact that the comment has. So it comes from a space of maybe joking, or maybe an unconscious bias that they have that they're not aware of. But it is important that you make them aware of it, because it's going to have an impact on you and your performance around that person and your willingness to support that person throughout the project. So make sure that you get it out of the way.
Okay, thank you. The next question that I have here is from Nolutando Zulu. She says, over the years, there's been a significant increase of women at executive and board level of mining companies. However, the executive roles are usually HR or IR. Board members are usually from other sectors. Why are there such a few technical women geologists, engineers, metallurgists at these senior levels? And I must say that is the question that I've also had in my head. So can you maybe assist us?
I think, Karien, that made me aware of that study that was published about the gender gap in different countries. That's the first thing that comes to my mind, and the fact that the researchers were quite honest about it, and they said they have no idea. They have no idea why this happens. What they did say, however, but this is not proven, is they said in countries where your income depends on this, where your livelihood and your ability to support yourself depends on it. It seems like there's women who more actively seek leadership roles in STEM, in science, in technology and engineering, and embracing that and moving into it. But in our more first world countries, where your livelihood doesn't necessarily depend on it, and you've got equal knowledge, equal opportunity, there's growth in your country, you are exposed, women tend not to actively seek roles in leadership roles in science, technology, and engineering. So for me, that question is still unanswered. If you've got the equal opportunity and knowledge, why not take it? The only thing that I want to do, again, thank you to Simon for the platform, going forward on different platforms, is I want to keep on encouraging women that if you've got the tools and you believe in your own value that you can add, you have to just first test the environment before deciding not to actively seek leadership roles.
Thank you, Zelmia. Yes, it's a very interesting outlook into a question indeed, because you see, even if you look at the leadership roles in South Africa, where women are, you find that most of the women that are in the leadership roles are not really purely technical women from geology or mining or metallurgy. They come from different fields, and we are in that field, in that space, but we are not pushing, you know, to go into those roles. And it's really something that is baffling for me.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, anyway, there are quite a few questions here, so let me not take too much time talking. There's a question here also, I think that was on the books, and I think that is answered because you did show all the books, because the question was asking about what is the name of the book that helps with controlling emotional reaction. I think you did put out the books there, so you can have a look. And then there's a question from Queen, which says, do you see much danger of complacency in implementing gender diversity organizations? For example, where people might think of this kind of transition as a once-off thing rather than something that needs to be ongoing or continuous. If so, could you give some thoughts on how organizations can best work to maintain gender diversity after they've accidentally or intentionally achieved significant change?
Yeah, that is the only thing I can say on that, Karien. You'll have to help me there. The only thing that I can say on that is look at your company's innovation, creative problem solving, thinking out of the box. If you look at a boardroom, look at how many disruptors you have. Look at how many people you have testing the boundaries. If that is not happening, you don't have enough diversity. I don't necessarily know how much weight we should place on gender diversity or race or religion. I want to say, let's rather say the company should always strive for balance and diversity in terms of numbers for all. Gender, race, doesn't matter. I think my criteria of success was always if everyone agrees and gives me a golden star and applauds. And there's no satisfaction in that feedback. When the project leader, when you're in dire straits and the project leader asks you to think out of the box and everyone just looks at you and agrees with you, you've got no growth. You've got no creative problem solving. You've got no innovation. As soon as you have disruptors in your team from other backgrounds, from other industries even, from other genders and race, and they disrupt the normal way of thinking and ask, why not this? Then you know you're on the right path. So if you're not innovating and you're not growing, you don't have enough diversity.
Thank you. Then one other question from Asha. She says, I hope it's she, I'm not sure. The question is, how does one manage imposter syndrome when managing people who come from different fields of study? So I assume it's a she there. Yeah.
Oh, me or both of us.
I think most of us have felt that syndrome once in a while.
Yeah, so I want to just quickly answer that from a professional side. I think I experienced it a little bit more in terms of being the psychologist in a very technical environment amongst engineers and construction managers and these hardcore, you know, tough guys and girls. But what changed it for me was embracing it. And it's difficult. You have to sit back and say, okay, am I okay with being the one that puts the emotion on the table, being the one that puts the questions about relationships on the table and about the connection between humans on the table? And I think what definitely supported me, and that's why leadership is so extremely important, is that Yaku, our project manager, actually enjoys anyone that disrupts. So he's got this quirk that he actually goes looking for the trouble in a certain way. So once I realized he actually appreciates, he's not comfortable with the emotion himself necessarily always, but he welcomes someone that puts something different on the table. And that actually paved the way for me to have the courage to also engage with the other people. So it's again something that starts within yourself. You need to go work on your courage and your courage skill and your courage fitness so that you can go sit at the table and be able to challenge and show people what you are capable of.
Yeah, I think practically, from a practical point of view, the work that helped me a lot is the one where Bill George talks about self-awareness, basically just realizing what is the value that you are bringing to the table. So there was a very nice study published, and again, the authors escaped me, but it was in Harvard Business Review, so we could maybe share this after the presentation, where they said, if you yourself do not know what the value is you're bringing to the table, how do you expect a team to believe in it? And the second thing is, and this is actually a technique that Karien taught me, is every time you get positive feedback, take the time to reflect on it, write it down, and put it in what we call an emotional piggy bank. So that every time you experience imposter syndrome, you go back to your piggy bank, you open it up, and you look at all the times in history that you've added value, so that you can say to yourself, I have survived this situation or overcome or added value in this situation. I can do it again.
So I basically not an imposter. That's what it means.
You are definitely not an imposter. Definitely not.
Okay, the next question is, Zelmia, what was the most difficult situation that you had to resolve during the project? What did you learn from it? This is from Elizabeth Links.
Oh, I wish I could have my hot commissioning manager right next to me now. We would have been holding hands while telling the story. It was during a stage, I put up the slide where I talked about a common language. So it was during a stage where we developed the definitions and criteria for commissioning of this project in a brownfields environment. So at that stage, he was still part of the owner's team. He was the client and he was receiving a plant. So he had an idea of what he wanted to receive, the product that he wants. He came from a history of, let's just say, difficult and challenging projects. So his experience wasn't that good. And I was new. I didn't know this environment. I didn't have a prejudice or a preformed idea or a bias. So I came in there with the best intentions, saying, but we'll give you this and you can then run with it. And it just triggered a situation where we didn't speak to one another for almost a month. So as a commissioning manager, I had a team member who completely disengaged. He showed up, but he wasn't there. Karien has a term for that. And we couldn't connect at all. So the work was standing still. And then Karien intervened and said, listen, let's go back to the baseline. Let's just create definitions, new definitions of commissioning, not according to standard or client or EXXARO policies and procedures from scratch. And we did that by going into the sessions with rules of engagement. And typical rules of engagement was any idea goes. You are not allowed to criticize, you are allowed to be curious and ask questions. Building the trust container. So in other words, clearly stating what you want from the session and what you don't want from the session. So that's just a few examples of how we resolved that specific situation. But I've had quite a few of those experiences.
Okay, the next question is from Tandazile Moyo. She says, Karien, may you please speak to overcoming culture expectations on women which limit the amount of time available to invest in their journeys, as well as present challenges from colleagues, assuming or wanting to excuse you from roles that would otherwise grow you as a woman?
Sure. I wish I had an answer for you on that.
Yeah.
There's so much unconscious, and whether it's conscious or unconscious, biases in the world about everybody. So I think what I want to say is do what you can with what you have. Influence where you can in terms of what's in your control. Yeah, so I see myself as a bridge builder. So I really do believe that the same way us as women have challenges in a technical environment, and where people would give you comments like, I see you're overloaded on estrogen today, because we actually get those comments and those remarks. There's also a bias towards men. And if you start by working on yourself and doing what you can with what you have, realizing what your true potential is, and going into the world, sitting at the table, doing what you need to do, showing them what you are capable then slowly and surely we will change that. But it's definitely a mammoth task, and we all need to pull together. And I just want to say on that point, there's a lot of good guys, much more good guys out there than guys wanting to keep women out of the working environment. And I want to encourage you to hook up with those guys, team up with them, because sometimes it's good to have a cheerleader initially that just can get you onto the platform, and from there you can run. So hook up with the good guys. There's a lot of them. I have a huge amount of them in my life, and I'm definitely where I am because I was willing to take hands with them, and I know they supported me, and they still support me. So.
Yeah, I think having a cheerleader for me, actually, I think it's something that is very important. Cheerleader and support structure, it really does make a difference. The next question, we've got lots of questions. Zelmia, how do you deal with the conflicts in a team? This is from Tanya. Do you think that in team conflicts have an effect on the entire, do you think that team conflicts have an effect on the entire team, or just those experiencing the conflict, especially since your team is under immense pressure and performing at high levels? I hope I read this correct. I think it's something to deal with conflicts in teams.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that question. So I just want to first of all say, if let's call it a little internal subsystem in an overall organizational structure has conflict, it very often spills over into other systems within the structure. So you would often, I think, hear about your own conflict that you thought were private and internal in your little team from other places in the organizational structure, and people watching you to see how you're going to handle this. It sort of sets the tone going forward. I think handling conflict in my own team, I always just, curious, try to understand. Oftentimes, the story I make up in my head about the undercurrent that I'm feeling here, the stress that I'm feeling here, oftentimes that story is incorrect and not true. So by staying curious and asking the questions to first understand will help you to eventually resolve the conflict constructively. And I think I think it's on the slide, yes. The Dare to Lead book helps a lot with first understanding, giving you the rumbling tools to ask the right questions, to first understand why is this happening, understanding why there is a problem to begin with. And I think in science, technology, engineering, we've also been taught it's oftentimes much more important than to first understand the problem before you start creating a solution for it. Then the second thing that's in this book that helped me a lot as you move into resolving the conflict is the engaged feedback checklist. So if you are not ready to go and sit next to that person and take ownership for your own role in the conflict, you are not ready to move into conflict resolution. And like Karien said, it's when you realize there's conflict and you first want to understand it, it's okay to ask for a timeout and to just understand the problem first before you go into solve mode and trying to resolve it. And it's okay to just unhook yourself from the negative stories and emotions in your mind or in your team before you want to go and give feedback or before you expect feedback to resolve this conflict immediately. It's never, it's a balance. Karien said, don't leave it too long. That's true. I usually avoided conflict. That's not constructive. That's actually destructive. But you also don't jump in head first. You first need to just understand what's going on.
Thank you, Zelmia. The next question is from Anonymous. Anonymous says, how do you break free from fearing or doubting your capability or worth in your team or company, especially when it is still in your very early career life?
So I want to use an example there from my 7-year-old daughter. She had to attend the school gala. She was very excited to be part of the swimming team. And when we arrived at the gala, there was a little boy from one of the other schools that didn't have feet. So he was walking around on his little stumps. And she's a hugely empathic person. So I think the emotion of that empathy just overwhelmed her, and she just wanted to go home. She started crying. She doesn't want to swim. She doesn't want to be near that situation. And then I went to sit with her on the grass and said, you are part of the swimming team. It's your responsibility to swim, but I'm here with you. So we sat on the grass, and I put the one earphone in my ear and the other earphone in her ear, and we listened to Katy Perry's Roar about 6 times very loudly, and I cried with her there on the grass. And then I said to her, okay, I'm going to be there with you when you jump into the pool, and your sister, your older sister, is going to stand on the other side of the pool, and Daddy will be behind the teachers with your towel. But you have to do this on your own. But we are with you all the way. But we can't swim for you. And she actually jumped into the pool, she swam, and when we got to the other side, I asked her, so what do you feel like? And she said, it feels great. So I said, this is what courage is. Doing it irrespective of being afraid. So the first tip I want to actually give people is make sure that you have a support system. Make sure that you have a safe space at home, people that support you, but also that you create a network of colleagues that support you. That cheerleader effect, that people that believe in you, that are with you in it, but not doing it for you. I cannot stretch enough how important social safety is for your own performance, for really functioning from your prefrontal cortex, the problem-solving, creative, innovative side of your brain. It's extremely important to have a social support system. So make sure that you have that at home and at work. Build good relationships with your
Actively seek it also, Professor. I think in an early career, please go and look for a good mentor. It doesn't have to be female, black, white, doesn't matter. Go and look for a good mentor, and please go and ask for feedback. Actively seek it. Don't wait for it to come your way. If you are doubting your own capabilities and the value that you add, if you're not getting enough recognition in the environment that you work in, go and seek it. Go and get someone. Like Karien said, go and establish your own support network and ask them if you can have a weekly check-in session with them to get feedback on your own outputs and your own role that you play.
Yes, I think that's very important. And I think we'll probably have to add there that you also start creating your piggy bank that Zelmia mentioned from the beginning. I'm sure it will help you as you grow in your journey. The next question is, queer men who is from an anonymous, queer men who are effeminate face the same stereotyping and even more discrimination from the largely masculine industry. Ever more that they are a bigger minority. What safe space, innovations, and corporate support is offered by companies, and what can you advise other companies, offered by your company, and what can you advise other companies to make this a topic when discussing diversity, discrimination, inclusion, empowerment of this minority group? I don't know who wants to take that question.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
I think I have a very personal experience with that, but it's not my story to tell, so I can't do it on this platform. But I want to say, in that situation, our leader did a good thing by creating, also facilitated, mind you, definitely facilitated session, where we all had the opportunity to share our vulnerabilities with the team. So we created an opportunity for this specific person to share his story and his experience in the mining industry, his specific experience at a mining BU. And the nice thing about that story was how it was resolved. So each of our disciplines have a mentor. So in metallurgy, we had a very strong, Karien, how do I say that, this empathetic mentor that just picked him up and supported him and guided him through it and placed him in specific teams that supported that type of diversity. So from my side, I have no room for exclusion. That's not, it stifles growth. and it stifles innovation. I've got no room for that. But having said that, you need to create what Brené Brown refers to as the platforms to share collective pain. And it won't happen in the first session or the second session. It's been taking us 2 years. You have to keep on creating that platform and allow people to be vulnerable, and then honor that vulnerability and create, like Karien said, the social safety for those people to thrive and to add value to the team, the value that they have to add.
Yeah, I want to, from my side, just also say, make sure that you get a professional facilitator. So make sure that you get someone that is well trained in the behavior sciences, that can support the group, that can keep the space safe for that group to go through that growth process. What worked well on our project, I think, specific is we had the same person growing with the project, with the people. So the context and where things came from and when sensitive stuff popped up, it was easy to navigate people through that because I had context and I had a bigger picture. But with these sensitive issues, with any diversity and inclusion stuff, I strongly recommend that you make sure that you get professional help to support your team through that.
Thank you, Karien and Zelmia. We've got one last question from Anonymous. She says, how does a young female navigate their way around an organization like a mine, where she's actually in a leadership role, but happens to be the youngest one on the team? So the older people on the same level treat you more like a child, as if they do not want you to progress beyond where you are.
I had fabulous male colleagues and team members on my team, but also in supporting functions, like, for example, the design engineers. And in one specific instance, I was treated like an ignorant girl, and these male champions immediately stood up and took the forefront and fought the good fight for me. And it actually bothered me a lot. It made me feel useless. So although I'm very thankful and I would never want to lose them, and like Karien said, I want to take hands with them because they help me feel safe. I was bothered by that specific incident. And Karien then described it for me. She gave me the language, and what she said is, these guys rescued you and you should actually be standing up for yourself. And the easiest tools on the table to help you with this is remain curious. So just accept the fact that you are the youngest, accept the fact that you are going to have a lot less experience than the male counterparts that's been doing this for longer. Accept that fact. And then from there, opt for the role of curiosity. So if you, just an example, if you have an idea that will work in your head already, guide your male counterparts and team members to that solution by asking questions. Asking them, why are we doing this like this? Why are we not trying that? I can see you have a lot of passion around this. Have you tried that? Because if you come from a learner point of view, instead of either being your parent or being your rescuer, these guys start collaborating with you and doing creative problem solving with you. I hope that helps. It's very, it's vast and a vast theme and a vast subject. But in these books and in this literature, there's, especially in Brené Brown's books, there's a lot of theory behind the curiosity culture and how it can help diversity to flourish and collaboration to flourish.
Thank you, Zelmia. That was our last question, and I just want to take this opportunity to really thank both of you for such a thought-provoking, inspiring, and excellent presentation. I'm feeling very honored to have chaired this session, and it's really, really inspiring to know that there are leaders, women leaders like you, Zelmia, in the mining sector, who are coming also from the technical background. And it also opens up for different views for us, you know, like some of the things that you presented, and the fact that it's not only about the skills, it's about knowledge, it's about, you know, also yourself as a person. All these things build up to make you the leader that you become. So it's not just sitting back and waiting for things to happen. We also as women have to take the role, but also we also need to inspire others and teach others so that we don't have a vacuum in the women leadership in the mining sector. So really it was a very wonderful, inspiring presentation, and I thank you, Zelmia, and I thank you, Karien, and I thank all the delegates that took part in this session today. And I just want to reiterate that the presentation is going to be sent to all the delegates and is also going to be made available on YouTube. So thank you once again for taking part in the SIMM webinar session today, and I hope to see you again in the future. Thank you again.
Thank you,
Zelmia and
Professor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.